Things can go from adorable to horror quickly when you see your family dog grabbing your 17-month-old baby. This was Sophie Taylor's shock when she walked into her living room to find this terrifying sight. Before we continue, please take some time to subscribe to Dailydose, like, and share this video with your friends. As she swiftly moved towards the scene to rescue her precious daughter from her loving dog, which she now dreaded anyway, Sophie realized that her dog had an extraordinary reason for acting in such a strange way. Hold on to your screen. This is the story of two family members trying to win a battle for survival. When Sophie's daughter and her dog met for the first time, the atmosphere was filled with that cute spark of genuine friendship. She could tell they would be best of friends, and they truly were. So fast forward to months later, this mother would never imagine that her sleek and adorable Doberman would act towards her baby in such a violent way. The situation quickly got out of hand, and beyond expectations, Sophie was in awe. Even though more than a dozen things were going through her mind at that moment, still she couldn't help but blame herself for trusting in her dog's passive personality and believing that was all there is to him. Sometimes our past experiences make us act in certain ways and depict the pattern for our behavior. Our furry friends are not exempted from this psychological trait. During Sophie's visit to the rescue shelter and citing her Doberman, she made findings of his behavior and personality. She was told that there are uncertainties surrounding how her Doberman may behave. This is because he was rescued from a sort of strange and unfriendly situation, and they believe this can make him unstable. Even at that, Sophie believed in giving him a chance and went through with the adoption. That one decision, whether risky or not, she was unsure at this time, but it was based on her trust for the natural instinct of dogs, which is to protect their owner and stay loyal to them. Sophie was at a place where she felt like this instinct and the love her family was going to shower on him would help her Doberman overcome any trauma he had been through. The unpredictability of a man's best friend dogs are known and mostly seen to be affectionate towards their owners. Members of the family enjoy unending love, loyalty, friendship, and especially warm snuggles from these canines. Other times, some owners have to deal with dog breeds that are naturally mean due to their genetic makeup. Some dogs are likely to behave more aggressively than others, and breeds like the Chihuahua, Dachshund, Dalmatian, Rottweilers, and even the Dobermans fall in this category. Naturally, dog lovers think twice before bringing them into their homes. However, this didn't stop Sophie and her husband from deciding to bring in a Doberman to be part of their family, even though they didn't plan to get this breed. Sophie said they never had a particular breed in mind. They were open to any furry friend that would steal their heart, and after the arrival of baby Sophie, they knew it was time to get up and prepare to sign some pet adoption papers. The new parents believed that growing with a dog will teach their daughter a sense of responsibility, bravery, and even help her be free-spirited while still enjoying the protection that a dog gives to their family. And this was their focus. Most people already have a preference for the kind of dog they want, even before they go out to adopt one. But the Taylors kept it cool with an open mind. They didn't only want a dog to be part of their family, they wanted to give a dog who had no family, a home and family. This motive pushed them to adopt an older rescue dog and give him a new family, instead of getting a dog from a breeder. On their visit to the rescue shelter, Sophie found this Doberman, and she felt her heart melt away. He stole it. She was filled with excitement, and the family adopted him. As the family and their latest member took the trip back home, Sophie and her husband went back and forth on a couple of names for the dog until they finally settled with Max. Max's charming, affectionate, and family-friendly personality made it so easy for Sophie to forget about all warnings and advice given to her about his disturbing past. She was well aware of his possibilities of being unstable, but this double new mom was willing to take the risk of having him in her home. After all, love conquers all. Even though Sophie wasn't scared of her dog, she tried to be very careful, especially in the early days of bringing him in. Sophie watched her newest family member very closely throughout the first week and believed there was no cause for alarm. His interaction with baby Emma seemed pretty normal. She was enjoying Max's company in the yard as they played together like they usually do. Sophie and her husband were still there to observe, and this time something seemed off. It was amusing to watch, but still they couldn't ignore that the atmosphere wasn't just the same. However, since Sophie was already comfortable with Max being a member of the family and she hasn't noticed anything unstable or unusual about him yet, Sophie didn't stop Emma and Max from playing their game, but she continued to watch over them. Slowly, the tension in the atmosphere was relieved, as Sophie's thoughts now focused on how Max's new friendship with Emma can provide healing for him from his disturbing past experiences. But she was suddenly caught in her optimistic thoughts when Max did the unbelievable. He grabbed the baby and slammed her on the floor. For almost 30 seconds, Sophie was petrified, even though she knew that by the nature and experiences of the dog, he was very likely to portray violent behavior, but she thought this environment had given him enough support to get through that. At that moment, there were different bursts of emotion from Sophie. She was terrified and angry. In the heat of everything, Sophie still thought to herself that this behavior was too strange and sudden, and it couldn't simply be a reaction to unstable thoughts from Max. Max had truly won her heart, and she believed he genuinely cared for Emma, so she saw no reason why he would want to hurt her. She was so shocked, she was unable to move for a while, just watching the happenings unfold. One would think that a mother's first instinct would be to jump right on the dog and pull out her daughter, but everything seemed so confusing and scary. It was as if after she watched Max react that way for the first time, the scene continued to replay in her head over and over again. Sophie thought to herself, "It's just a reaction. He's going to stop soon." But Max didn't, and this torture only just started. While still in shock and focusing on Khan's actions, Sophie got a new insight into the situation. It suddenly looked like his aggression wasn't on Emma, but something on the floor around her, even though Sophie couldn't see anything, and at that moment she thought, "Is this what the doctors warned me about?" Max didn't look like he was going to stop anytime soon. He kept pushing Emma around in an attempt to grasp what no one else could see. Something else was peculiar about this situation. For Sophie, it was how calm Emma was the entire time. She didn't react violently or fearfully. Emma was still focused on her game while Max continued to drag. To Emma, it seemed as if the drag was part of the game for Max. Meanwhile, neighbors who witnessed the scene were frightened and worried about how things would end for this new family. When Sophie could think clearly and saw that Max's aggressiveness wasn't towards her baby, she came out of that shock, swiftly moved towards the both of them herself, and carried her baby up from the floor. Immediately after everyone was thrown into confusion, the newest member of her family, Max, suddenly started to wail in agony while rolling on the floor. This drastic change in his attitude left everyone surprised and gave them barely a second to rejoice that Emma was now safe from harm. Now that Sophie had her baby in her arms, she was examining her to check if she had suffered any injuries from the incident with Max. Emma was fine, not even a scratch, which made it really clear that Max wasn't trying to hurt her. With this discovery, Sophie looked up and took her gaze to the spot in the backyard where the attack had happened, and nothing was there. After adjusting her gaze to a few meters after, she found Max on the floor, panting. With his tongue out, he was struggling to breathe, panting and fighting to keep his eyes open. Max was not doing good. Now Sophie had a new cause for alarm. Her baby is fine, but it looks like her dog is about to give up the ghost. But what could have gone wrong in such a little time? She also started to check him for any bruises or cuts, but she realized that it was a case of poisoning. Sophie figured that something had either bitten or stung Max, and he was trying to save baby Emma from it. She fell in love with her hero dog all over again, and she was going to do everything she could to see that he was alive and well. This newest addition to their family is doing exactly what Sophie thought he would: be loyal and try to protect the family. In such a short period, Max was already battling an unknown dangerous creature to protect his baby without thinking twice or giving in to his fears, and Sophie decided she was going to be brave about seeing Max's well again. Max had already suffered a seizure, and now he regained consciousness only for him to wake up and find out that some people around him hadn't really cared. He knew now that in that place, only Sophie and his new family cared, and she was going to do everything to see them get to the hospital in no time for Max to get treatment. Sophie needed help carrying Max into the car because he couldn't move on his own, and off to the vet's office they went. She drove so fast as a life depended on it, which it did anyway. In the blink of an eye, the violent dog everyone had feared now became the dog everyone was talking about for putting his life on the line for his family. When they first got into the car and took off, she could hear Max panting, but after a while he stopped, and she saw his eyes closing which got Sophie more scared. It's been such a long day with many scary happenings. She didn't want to go through all of that again. The best she could do now was to keep hope alive and believe that he would make it. Max's case was an emergency, and there was no way she would try and fix it herself. But the way the Doberman was reacting, somewhere at the back of her mind, she was considering packing the car and unleashing the vet in her. But she wasn't ready to be a vet, and decided to step on the gas and drive faster instead. She got to the hospital, and while the doctor was examining Max and trying to treat him, he made conversations with Sophie. Sophie described how terrifying the accident in the backyard was, and added how fast she had driven to get here. The vet commended her for acting swiftly to get Max to the hospital quickly and ensuring that he was urgently attended to. When Sophie arrived at the hospital, it suddenly seemed like she wasn't the same person who needed help lifting Max earlier. This time she carried Max herself and kept running into the wards until another nurse came to help her. Sophie then repeatedly told the nurse that Max had been poisoned and he needed an antidote. The nurse communicated this to the vet on duty, and he first had to assess Max again to know the severity and exactly what treatment he should be given. The vet confirmed it was poison and started to administer treatment immediately. This made Sophie a bit calm, and she stepped out of the room for a moment. In the corridors, she met the nurse, and they started to converse. Sophie narrated the entire ordeal to her. The nurse also commended her for acting fast and saving Max's life. Sophie credited it to her motherly instinct and said the only thing she could think of is how much it would hurt Emma, herself, and her husband. They were only starting a family now. They shouldn't be dealing with any losses just yet, especially not her precious dog. As Sophie stepped back into the room where Max was receiving treatment, she saw that her self-sacrificing and warrior Doberman was able to keep his eyes open. She saw some strength in them, but still, there were so many uncertainties surrounding the incident, especially since we have no idea where the poison came from. Looking at him again, she was so thankful for this love and this family. Tears started to well up in her eyes, and more than anything, she wanted Max to be well again. The vets advised her to leave the room again, and all Sophie could do was pray and hope that Max would be fine. This simple task of waiting seemed so difficult for Sophie. It was hard not to think of all the possibilities that could happen in that room, good or bad, but she had no choice but to rely on the expertise and trust in the vets treating her, Max. The nurses tried to calm her down, and they thought to engage her in another conversation, but it wasn't working this time. Sophie was in her own world, walking up and down the room. Sophie's husband also called her at this time to know how things were going, but she couldn't find the words to explain. The tears that had welled up in her eyes were now ready to drop. At this point, Sophie was exhausted and frustrated and just wanted it to all end. As her husband was trying to comfort her, one of the vets came out of the room, and Sophie asked what the situation was. He didn't look like he was bearing any good news. When he answered, he made it clear that Max was alive, but didn't know for how long or how well. But they were doing all they could to stabilize him, and they would love to wait to see how he responds. They further advised her to go home and get some rest, also giving Max time to rest and then return the next day. Her husband was still on the other end of the phone. He heard what the doctor said and also seconded that his wife should be on her way. She used the last strength left in her to take that drive home. Getting home and seeing her daughter safe and sound gave her another moment of joy, but it didn't last for too long. Her mind was clogged with so many what-ifs. What if she didn't stand there frozen when the incident was happening but dashed into the scene immediately? Now she has to live with this quilt that her dog would die to save her daughter, and she was filled with rage while he was at it. She just wants to have her family complete, safe, and sound. This was how her thoughts wandered all through the night. Sophie called in sick at work to devote this new day to Max. Her husband left for work while she and baby Emma set out to the hospital to check on Max. As a mother, she did her best to hide the anxiety and fear in her heart from Emma, especially so she wouldn't understand it was about Max. Emma missed Max too, but she had no idea he was in a critical condition. As they got to the hospital, they went to the reception, and the nurses asked them to wait for a while to check in with the doctors. In about 10 minutes, they had an appointment and were called in to see the vet treating Max yesterday. Time for the full truth. Shall we? Today, the doctor seemed to be more certain than yesterday. His countenance alone gave Sophie hope, but then again, Doctors are trained for this kind of thing, she thought, and that ray of hope disappeared just like that. It was time for the doctor to speak, and he started by saying that everyone should be thankful for baby Emma. She was so lucky and blessed to have had Max around her at that exact time. The threat crept into the backyard and came for both of them, but Max wasn't going to let this creature get it without a fight. This animal we're about to discover had been living in Taylor's backyard without rent for months. Emma would have been the one poisoned if not for Max, and the poison would have had a more dangerous effect on her. So Max saved the day. He saved a baby and a beautiful family from a considerable amount of pain and agony. This is where we see why Max acted so aggressively around the baby earlier. As the doctors were trying to remove the poison from Max, they wanted to tell exactly what kind of poison it was. From experience, they invited 2 experts to examine which animal poison was found in Max. They called in a reptile expert and a sting expert. The reptile expert confirmed this was a bite from one of the most lethal snake species. From this, the vets gathered that Max wasn't aggressive but defensive. At the instant he sighted the snake moving on the grass at the backyard close to the spot he and baby Emma were playing, he quickly jumped over her, dragged and pulled her away from the spot, and then jumped back to fight the poisonous reptile. With his natural dog instinct, Max knew he had to protect his owners, and especially this little girl he was already fond of, so it didn't take him a second to think twice before swinging into action, even though he knew it was dangerous for him. It will be survival for the strongest. Immediately after Sophie heard this, she called her husband to get snake catchers to find the culprit that wants to test the strength of her family. She was so shocked and terrified all over again that a very poisonous reptile could have bitten her daughter. What would have happened to her baby? She broke down in tears. She had been trying to hold back those tears all morning. Is Max okay? Now that the threat has been identified, Sophie was so grateful to this furry family member for looking out for her baby, and all she wanted was to know that he was doing okay as well. She really wanted him to get out of his sickbed so she could spoil him with all the love he deserves, so she could celebrate him and tell everyone what he did, but no one was sure if he was going to make it out of this. Doctors have done their best to detoxicate him, and now everyone has to wait for him to heal. With high hopes, the Taylors prayed for their Doberman to recover. This Doberman called Max was in the business of stealing hearts. In just a couple of months of joining this family, his charming personality and his loyalty have stolen their hearts away. He is now popular and loved even among the neighbors. Now all doubts about him due to his nature and past had been cleared, and they were determined that Max is a keeper. He has to come back to them. As they waited for him to react favorably to treatment, Sophie got news from her husband at home that the snake catchers found the reptile. And it wasn't just any kind of snake. The snake that tried to harm Emma was a mulga, one of Australia's most poisonous and dangerous reptiles. And from the look of things, it had been living in the backyard for 4 months. With this realization of how dangerous the snake was, Sophie was even more worried about the chances of Max surviving this bite. After getting the family he deserved, Max's luck at enjoying it may have been cut short as things stand. It occurred to Sophie that since Max never really had a family before, he would go any length to protect the one he just found. Now that the situation seemed clearer and the doctors knew exactly what kind of snake had bitten him, they knew more clearly what actions to take. Hours later, the vets came out of Max's ward, and one of them approached Sophie and Emma and invited them in to see Max. At that moment, there was so much going through her mind. Is he alive? Is he dead, amputated? She was truly hoping for the best, but the worst expectations kept running through her mind. When she finally got in, she saw Max sitting upright, and he was barking. Even though he was bandaged, he no longer looked like a shadow of himself. He was alive and definitely on the road to complete recovery. Sophie was overwhelmed with joy. The doctors were pretty excited too, and Sophie called her husband immediately to share the good news. Max had put himself in harm's way to protect Emma, and now life has given him another chance. He was slowly regaining his strength, and there was no longer any poison in his system. Since his full recovery was highly assured, Sophie was going to be allowed to take him back home while they came for regular checkups. The vets were very impressed at how Max fought through everything. The reptile expert also noted that the snake couldn't have a stronghold on Max because of how strongly he fought back. If he hadn't, and the snake held him for longer, he'd have started to crush his bones. This Doberman was really a fighter. At this point, everything was all starting to make sense and come together to Sophie. She was happy they could move forward as a healthy family. Max wasn't doing well at all just yesterday, but after that nightmare, they'd be leaving with a healthier version of him, and they were very grateful for it. A fresh start. Family's home, the neighbors are happy, others are mowing their backyard more often, and some are considering getting a dog as well. This story became a popular one in their family-friendly neighborhood. Sophie had made up her mind to keep this Doberman for life. He's going to grow with them as they grow their family.